Hey everyone, this is Nick, and oh boy do we have a monkey paw situation right there with the EU implementing their new set of regulations against gatekeepers, which prompted Apple to actually make their terms worse for most of their developers. We also have Flathub reaching 1 million active users, and we have some Wayland drama around the most basic of features. And we also have this segue to our sponsor. This video is sponsored by ProtonMail, which is fitting because, as you obviously all know, this week was Data Privacy Week, the annual celebration of the first legally binding international treaty that deals with privacy and data protection. And also a nice reminder that you can take steps to improve your privacy online, like using ProtonMail. It's your all-in-one open-source private and encrypted suite, complete with an email address, a VPN, a calendar, an online storage space, and a password manager. Everything uses zero-access encryption, so not even Proton employees can look at your data, and it's end-to-end encrypted as well. ProtonMail also comes with all the privacy-focused features you would expect, like email aliases, blocking email trackers, quickly unsubscribing from newsletters, and filtering out spam and phishing attacks. And switching from Gmail can be done in just a few clicks. Your Proton account is free, and if you need more features or more storage space, they offer paid plans that will scale with your needs. So head over to the link in the description and get started with a private, open source, and secure email service. So, Apple is now opening up iOS in a pretty big way, at least for EU citizens. But the way they're doing it seems pretty anti-competitive. First, it looks like developers will now be able to provide alternative app stores on iOS. That will be vetted by Apple and will require an Apple developer account. Users will be able to set these as the default app store on their devices. Apps contained in these stores will be able to avoid Apple's commission, apart from the annual subscription to be an Apple developer, because apps will still have to be notarized. If developers decide to implement their own payment method for in-app purchases, Apple won't take any commission on that, but if developers want to use Apple's payment system, they will obviously have to pay the usual 30% fee. Apps available in the official App Store will also be able to use another payment system than Apple's, in which case the company will still take a 17% fee. Which is the first problem. It's bonkers that Apple would take a commission for an application that doesn't use their payment system. Developers are already paying to be on the App Store through the Apple Developer Annual Fee. Apple will also add an additional fee for popular apps. Once you pass 1 million annual installs in the EU, Apple will charge 50 cents per install, which obviously is not justified at all. There's also a sizable limitation to sideloading and alternative app stores. Developers have to provide a single version of their app on different stores, meaning developers cannot provide a version with more features in the alternative app store and a less powerful one on Apple's app store. Now next, Apple will let users run third-party browsers on iPhones and iPads, and I mean real third-party browsers, not just Safari with a different user interface. Obviously, this is only in the EU, and Apple will still retain the right to approve these browsers. But it's a great step for a more open web where people can use their browser of choice. But also it's a terrible thing for the open web because people will just use Chrome, and so Chrome's rendering engine will be an even bigger monopoly, and Google will have even more control over how the web works and is rendered. And since this change is only for the EU, I think companies might not bother with developing or porting their engines to iOS because they won't be able to ship these new versions to the entire world, so they have to maintain two versions of the same app with different engines. App developers are not happy about these changes. Spotify called them a farce, Epic said it's a horror show, and Mozilla said that having to maintain two versions of the browser is a burden that Apple doesn't have to bear, which is unjust. Proton's CEO also said that these changes have so many strings attached that it makes it impossible for developers to benefit from them. So at first, I looked at these and I felt, yeah, these are good changes for users, but actually a lot of developers might not even bother since there are so many limitations, validations, and steps that Apple can take to make life miserable for everyone that doesn't use their own app store. So as usual, Apple sucks. They just don't want to give up the control they have over their platform, even though that control is completely unjustified, anti-competitive, and anti-consumer. So yeah, not surprised that developers are super unhappy with this. Hopefully these changes, when they are examined by the EU, will be sanctioned, or at least Apple will have to modify how they implemented all of this, because this is not in the spirit of the law at all. Now there was a new version of the Wayland Protocols last week, with a few interesting additions. First, there's a new transient seat protocol, which will be used to better support remote desktops, and it is already supported through WaveVNC in WL routes and Sway. The DMA buff protocol is also stable to improve how compositors and apps communicate and draw things on screen. This is no longer experimental. And it also looks like Enlightenment has now been dropped from the protocol member group, as they weren't really engaging with the project. Of course, if they decide to get more involved, they will be welcomed back. Now, not necessarily Wayland focused, but there's a new portal being implemented as well, to let applications grab the high contrast preference that you set on your desktop and to apply it to all apps that support that, including Flatpaks. This has been added to the XDG standards, and most major desktops have acknowledged it and are working to support it as well, which is a win for accessibility. And we also have another protocol being submitted to allow apps to set their own app icon for specific windows on Wayland, and this one appears surprisingly controversial and seems to generate a lot of debate. The proposal looks absolutely logical, basically using the icon that is set in the .desktop file first, and if there is none of that, the app could specify an icon from the XDG specification, which would then respect the user's icon theme. And some people are unhappy, obviously, because we're talking about Wayland and Linux, so people are saying that .desktop icons should not be the priority. App image devs want more than just desktop icons and are trying to cram that into the protocol. And Kwin developers also pointed out that they need way more icon sizes, which the protocol could handle, but apparently they don't want to do it this way. It's all a giant mess. So it's good to see that the Wayland protocols are being extended, but what isn't good to see is that we still cannot agree on anything, even the most basic of features, which is displaying a freaking icon for a freaking window. And obviously this is all linked to fragmentation. If we didn't have 20 different ways of shipping software, 20 different desktops, and 20 different background systems, well, we would not have these issues and all of this would be solved and would have been solved for years. Now, Flathub has cemented its place as one of the biggest app stores for Linux, as they reached a big milestone, over 1 million active users. They have reached 1.6 billion app downloads and are hosting more than 2,400 applications, 850 of which are currently verified, meaning that they're coming from the original developers and they aren't third-party repackaging efforts like what you would find on a distro's repos. Obviously, Flathub doesn't track their users, but they do know how many people have downloaded and updated the free desktop SDK, which is necessary for Flatpaks to run. And so they know how many people actively use Flatpaks by updating this framework. They feel that their growth comes from the fact that they have the most popular Linux apps available in there, and also from the fact that the Steam Deck has been very popular, as a lot of the most downloaded apps are emulators and game-oriented applications. A lot of popular distros also have Flathub enabled by default, including Linux Mint, Pop! OS, or Fedora, which cannot hurt. And it is really good to see Flathub growing and slowly becoming the standard app store. There's still a lot of work to do to implement payments and restoring purchases, and there's still a lot of work to do on Flatpak as a format itself, but we're slowly closing into a unified packaging format, which, as I mentioned in the previous article, is probably a good thing. Now, the Budgie desktop has a nice roadmap for 2024 and beyond. For the first quarter, they want to get started on Wayland and improving Flatpak and Portals support. The second quarter should finish the Wayland session, and Q3 and 4 will see the release of a Wayland-only Budgie 10 desktop, with continuous bug fixing and improvements based on community feedback, until they think Budgie is ready, at which point they will put Budgie 10 in maintenance mode and they'll only focus on Budgie 11, which will pretty much be a full rewrite of the desktop. They will start work on that during this year as well, starting with porting various backend components and implementing the basics of the desktop. So yeah, another fully rewritten desktop, which is not going to be based on GNOME, because GNOME has refocused their efforts on developing things that work for them, which I think is normal, but also more fragmentation. So we'll have to see if Budgie becoming its own thing actually brings something to the Linux desktop ecosystem, or if it's just going to be an also ran which has spent years redeveloping something for no real benefit for end users. Now, Linux Mint's Edge ISO is now available. If you haven't followed along, Linux Mint will now provide an install image shipping with a newer kernel, as Linux Mint relies on Ubuntu LTS, and this means that at the end of the life of the distro, it tends not to work well on recent hardware or to not be installable at all. So the Edge ISO is here to provide a recent kernel out of the box, in this case jumping from 5.15 to 6.5, which should alleviate a lot of the problems. You can already download it from Mint's website, and I think it's a great initiative. Because 5.15 is a very old kernel, and you're missing out on virtually every performance improvement of the past, 2 years? So yeah, even if you don't have the most recent hardware, you should probably just install Mint using the Edge ISO instead of the regular one. And honestly, I think Mint should make the Edge ISO the default once they have sufficient testing. And let's finish this with gaming, and first we have some disappointing news. It looks like Ayaneo decided against using HoloISO as the default for their new handheld. They had previously announced that the Ayaneo Next Lite would ship with SteamOS, then they revealed it would just be HoloISO, an unofficial build of SteamOS, and now they're saying that the device will instead ship with Windows 11 by default, although you will get the option to get it with HoloISO if you want. This apparently comes from some feedback from customers that would prefer using Windows on a handheld for some reason. This obviously is a disappointment. I was really happy to see Linux-based systems making their way onto more gaming devices out of the box as the default option, but I guess if more people want Windows, they kinda have to give them that. Although I will admit, I don't understand why anyone would prefer Windows 11 on an underpowered handheld that, let's remember, is less powerful than the Steam Deck. The games that the Steam Deck or SteamOS would not support will not run well on this device at all, so you're sacrificing controller friendliness, performance, battery life, and the general interface and user friendliness of the operating system to run a few games poorly. I don't get it. Now, there are some proposed modifications to the Linux kernel to make running Windows games and apps faster when using Wine or Proton. This all consists in a new driver called NT-Sync that would expose a new virtual device in /dev to implement some of the Windows synchronization APIs. These currently run as a normal process, but this also means that this process can become a bottleneck that slows down how Windows programs are executed on Linux. And with these changes, the issue would be removed, which would result in much better performance when gaming on Linux through Wine or Proton, as in plus 21% in Metro 2033 or plus 678% in Dirt 3. Generally, it looks like it helps a lot of games to double their performance on Linux. And this doesn't mean it's gonna be plus 600% FPS in certain games. It's probably just 600% faster at executing the specific calls that this API implements. But it should translate in a lot more FPS in a lot of games. And there's an interesting new project for gaming on Linux outside of Steam. It's called Unified Linux Wine Game Launcher, or ULWGL. And no, it's not yet another launcher application. It is a runtime that is meant to be used by our various graphical launchers to unify how games are run. It's developed by the prolific Glorious Eggroll, who is the maker of Nobara and GE Proton, and it's pretty much a reimplementation of the Steam Linux runtime, which will let most launchers use Proton outside of Steam, something that has been relatively problematic in the past, meaning that most launchers use Wine and this just doesn't work as well as Proton. The goal is to have most launchers rely on this instead of various Wine rebuilds, so all the fixes, all the tweaks, and all the various arguments you can add to run a game as best as can be shared between tools. You would basically just have one way of launching a game, no matter the launcher or the tool, and it's absolutely amazing. And I really hope it catches on and it works well, because it would mean you can just pick any graphical app you want and it wouldn't have any impact on how well the game you're planning to run works. Right now, if you run a game through Lutris or through Heroic, you might not get the same experience at all. With the unified Wine game launcher whatever, it would probably be much more unified because you would just use the Proton version you have on your system for every single launcher, and so a game would run exactly the same whatever the launcher you're using, which is obviously great for new users coming to Linux. There's much less work to be done and much less knowledge to be had to actually be able to play something. And if you want to play games on Linux, why not check out our sponsor, Tuxedo? They make laptops, desktops, and NUCs that ship with Linux out of the box. All the hardware inside these devices has been picked specifically because it runs really well with Linux. And in their testing, if they encounter any issues or problems, they actually submit patches upstream to fix the problems for everyone, not just for themselves. They have a big range of devices that will cover every price point and every need. You can customize the internals, you can choose your own keyboard layout for your laptop, you can have your own logo engraved on the lid. It's all very customizable, all the laptops can be opened, repaired, and upgraded. And well, you just know that Linux is gonna run on your device and that you're helping supporting Linux's development as well. So if you need a new computer and you plan to run Linux on it and you don't really want to have to do all the guesswork of whether something will run well or not and put in some elbow grease to add the few pieces that are missing, just click the link in the description below and get your PC from Tuxedo. Everything will run and you'll probably be happier for it. So thanks everyone for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't hesitate to like, to subscribe, to turn on notifications and all the other things that YouTube likes. And if you really enjoy the channel, I have plenty of links in the description to help support it. And if you become a Patreon member or a YouTube member, you will actually get a daily audio show for all these Linux and open source news. So thanks for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!